Welcome to the No Unfinished Business podcast. There are 1,000 different ways your clients can leave unfinished business, but no single advisor can address every issue. In every episode, we'll answer the important questions to help professional advisors focused on individual clients. Attorneys, CPAs, and financial advisors identify and eliminate those planning blind spots so you can speak competently and confidently to your clients and help them leave no unfinished business. Shelby, thanks for stopping by today.
Hi, happy to. Thanks for having me.
So we've known each other for years, and you and my wife are rescue buddies of international dog rescue buddies at this point. But part of what comes up and part of the reason to talk to you is knowing what goes on for rescuing pets, specifically here in Houston, but more generally, what should pet owners be thinking about when it comes to estate planning? Because eventually we all leave, and we don't want our pets to be caught in that transition and left out or possibly improperly impacted because their owners had the audacity to die and not leave effective instructions.
Yeah.
So as a good starting point, what happens to an animal who doesn't have a home? Obviously, there are lots of rescues in Houston. It's not going to happen to most of our listeners who are hopefully going to have at least somebody going through the house. But even just start with what happens to stray animals in Houston before a rescue gets involved.
Yeah, so in Houston, we've got a really bad animal overpopulation problem. A lot of people don't tend to know that because in areas of the town, like say if you're in Rice University, you're never going to see a stray dog. But if you're in the 3rd Ward or the 5th Ward, stray dogs are everywhere. A lot of that has to do with the fact that the city and the county, they just don't come out for certain areas. And also those people that are in lower income areas are less likely to actually call animal control. They just assume that they won't come out. So there's lots of areas of town where you just may never see a stray dog. So I feel like people don't really know that it's as big of a problem as it is. But in Houston, what happens is either a good citizen like Emily goes out, and for anybody listening, Emily is John's wife. And she is my friend and fellow animal rescuer. But people like Emily will go out and they'll pick up that animal and try to figure out a long-term plan for them. What we see a lot of the time, I volunteer for the Harris County Animal Shelter, and we can see the reasons why animals end up in the shelter. And sadly, one of the big reasons is because the owner has passed away. They would be considered initially a confiscation case and they give the families, I believe, between 5 to 10 days for the family of the deceased to come and pick up that animal. Sadly, the majority of the time, nobody ever comes for that pet. I think people just assume that their friends or family member would take care of an animal if they were to pass away, especially suddenly. But sadly, that's really not the case. I can only remember in the past year one time where family actually came and got a pet of the person that had passed away, which is really sad because the animal's confused not only because they lost their owner, but also because they are now in the shelter in one of the scariest environments they could possibly be put in.
Yeah, and you said one out of however many, but can you put some numbers on how big not only deceased confiscated animals, but also just rescue animals in Harris County are more generally?
Yeah, sure. So per day, the number of animals that come into the shelter changes. It used to have a lot higher intake before COVID. Since COVID hit, they made both shelters, the City of Houston Shelter Bark and Harris County, have both made everything appointment only. So if you're able to pick up an animal on the side of the road and you go try to take them to the shelter, you're actually not able to do that immediately. But they get between 40, both of these shelters independently get 40 to 60 animals every day. And if there's 40 to 60 animals coming in and the shelter is already full, 40 to 60 animals have to leave every day to keep them from having to euthanize. And when it's a situation, I feel like once the holding period is over for those animals that their owner passed away, they're the first on the chopping block to be possibly put on the euthanasia list. And that just happens because they know no one is coming for those pets. Whereas stray animals, there could still be someone looking for that animal. So it's a tough situation for the shelter, but they're supposed to do with the resources they have.
Right, and so the confiscated animals, they have 5 to 10 days before they're put on euthanasia list. What about the stray animals? How long do they have if they get picked up?
Yeah, stray animals have between 2 to 3 days before they can possibly be put on the list to be euthanized. And if an animal is critically injured, let's say that they come in and they have a broken back or something really critical, they could be euthanized immediately. Now, most of the time that doesn't happen. And another note on injured animals, if you ever find an injured animal, you can turn in that animal to the shelter without an appointment. It doesn't matter if it's appointment only. If they're injured, the shelter has to legally accept them. But stray animals get between 2 to 3 days. It's 3 days at Harris County Animal Shelter, 2 days at the City of Houston Shelter. That kind of varies across the country. It depends on where somebody's at. But if you Google how long is the stray hold in your state, that will give you an answer on Google, just depending on if someone lives somewhere outside of Houston.
Okay. So this is where you and Emily come in with rescue work. So here in Harris County, how does the rescue fit into this plan?
Yeah, so what rescues do, there's two different kinds of rescues generally. Some rescues save from shelters, some rescues save from the streets, and then some save from both. It just kind of depends on what kind of organization you're working with. Most organizations in Houston, there's about 300 to 400 rescues, if I had to guess, in Houston that are working to save animals, but most of them are completely volunteer run. Like Emily, we joke that she should be getting paid by the city or the county or somebody because she spends so much of her time and own money and resources to help animals. And she is one of many people that do that. Most of the organizations are completely volunteer run. I think one misconception is that everybody involved in rescue is paid, and that's so far from the truth. So when you reach out to, like, let's say a rescue organization, you pick up an animal and you're trying to turn them in, be really patient with those people. Those people have rescue pets of their own, jobs, families, all of that. Everything that you do every day, they have that plus hours and hours of volunteer work. So a rescue group or a volunteer will pick up an animal from the street, and then it's basically just a long run until they find a forever home. So that includes different medical things. If they are injured or have any kind of illness, the rescue group would treat that illness, and then they'll place them in a foster home. You guys know a lot about fostering. For anybody that doesn't know, is just bringing home an animal temporarily until they either find a forever home or can go on transport to another state that has a shortage of adoptable pets, for the easiest way to think about it. But the rescue group will place those animals in a foster home and then begin to market them to people to adopt. And then once that animal's adopted, they go to their forever home.
Right. And one of the things I know from talking to my clients about the pet estate planning and thinking about what rescues do, they're always surprised to hear that so many of these rescued animals get shipped to other states. And just hearing that it's what RPM, Rescued Pets Movement, that you work with and that Emily does a lot of time with, it's what, 4 or 5 vans every week that are going somewhere?
Yeah.
So
We send on 2 different days of the week. So we have usually 4 to 6 that go up on Tuesday, and then 4 to 6 that go up on Thursday. So it's a ton of mileage getting from Houston to wherever they're going.
And roughly how many animals is that for each van train that's leaving?
Yeah, sure. Each van carries 40 cats or about 30 dogs. The dog crates depend on how big the dog is, and we do a Tetris with them to get all the crates in there, but it's usually about 30 dogs and 40 to 50 cats.
So calling that roughly 150 to 200 animals twice a week.
Yep, that's correct.
And
last year we did, I think, 10,135 dogs and cats.
Yeah. And again, the thought and the reason is you're shipping them to places like Denver that don't have a stray problem, and in a lot of cases what the animals are adopted out shortly after they get there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. People don't quite understand how Colorado is not that far from Texas, really. So people don't really understand why we have such a horrible, horrible problem, and up there they just don't have it. And there's a couple different reasons for that. One of them is just the weather. There's 2 reasons behind the weather that really contributes to our animal population problem. The one thing that I don't think people realize is that dogs or cats that live in Colorado could only have 1 litter per year because their body is not able to produce more than that, because their body goes into hibernation of sorts when it's cold. Whereas in Houston and in Texas especially, they can have 2 to 3 litters per year. So it's a year-round breeding season where animals can just keep on having babies. And then also a big problem is that, not a big problem, but in Houston, dogs can live on the streets every day of the year almost. We very rarely have a freeze that's hard enough to actually make animals pass away. Whereas in Colorado, if an animal is either outside and abused by its family, they're just left outside, they'll pass away. Or if they're a stray animal, every single year those animals are going to pass away. Whereas in Houston, they can just keep reproducing. There's areas of town where there are packs of dogs that have been there for years and they just keep having more babies, and it makes the problem bigger and bigger and bigger. And then another thing is the cultural differences between the South and places like Colorado. In Colorado, if you buy a dog from a breeder, people are kind of like, oh, that's not a cool thing to do. It's really like the cool hip thing to do, to adopt an animal and save a life. That's super different than it is here. And then also they've had spay and neuter laws in place since the 90s in Colorado. So Houston has no real spay and neuter laws for making it difficult on backyard breeders. So that's exacerbated the whole problem. Whereas in Colorado, they've had those laws in place since the 90s.
Got it. So as we turn to, well, what should we be doing in terms of planning? What I want people to think about is, well, you've got these family members, something's going to happen to you, and they can't talk. They can't tell anybody what's going on. They can't tell anybody when they need to be fed or what medicines they need to be doing. So it's really thinking through the process of, you have a pet, what should happen to them if something happens to you? Yeah, because as an estate planner, one of the things that I'm looking at is, where can we put these instructions? And it can go in a few places. In the will, we may not make a specific gift of the pets. As much as they may be family members, they are still treated as property under Texas law. What we can do, and frequently will do, is make sure that we include language in there to ensure that whoever's receiving the gift of their pets also is informed, well, here's some cash to go along with it. We may also direct the executor to keep the pet in the lifestyle to which they'd been accustomed, so that they know they're allowed to spend money on that pet. Beyond that, having that list of instructions, knowing how and where to find things, it may not go in a will or a trust agreement, but including information somewhere so that people can find it. So it's not a mystery. I mean, the clients who were here earlier this morning, well, they've got a cat, and that cat doesn't really need any special treatment. It just needs food in the bowl and clean litter. If something were to happen to me or Emily or both of us, like, each of our dogs has a list of required medications that get delivered at specific times every day. They have to get fed on a particular schedule, and they also have their own set of medical specialists that they need to go see on a pretty regular basis. And so it really is, okay, if nothing else, if something happens to us, have we written down what Grizz, Molly, and Emily need to, or Grizz, Molly, and Billy, not Emily. Emily's got her own care schedule, but the three of them need their own particular schedule to get things taken care of.
Yeah, so not only having that information all in one consolidated place, I think is important, but also having it to where lots of people have access to it, like giving access to it to someone like you or a close family member or friends. But it would need to include, like, what kind of food they have, what are their exercise requirements, like you mentioned, medical issues, who their vet is would be really important, last date of vaccines, that kind of thing. Also, their microchip number would be important to keep in there. Yeah, and just having it in a really accessible place. So not if something happens to you, like, let's say if something happens in an emergency, you would want whoever came in that house to immediately be able to find it. So personally, I put it on the refrigerator. Any of my pets that are on any kind of specific, like, regime or medications and that kind of thing, I just have that all in one place. Keep it on your fridge and make sure some important people in your life have it. I think that's a great step for all pet owners.
Yeah, and you also mentioned microchips, which I forget, are they now required in Houston, or is that still you should, but...
Yeah, as of January, I believe it's January 30th, they are required in the city of Houston for all city of Houston residents. But outside of that, it's just a great idea to have them. They're really small, full procedure to do. It's about the size of a grain of rice, and it gets implanted right in the dog's shoulder blades. When Meg got her microchip, she didn't even, like, flinch. She didn't know anything happened. It's really painless for the dog. And the one thing with the microchip, though, is once you get your pet microchipped, you want to make sure that you go in and put in your actual information. There's a website called freepetchipregistry.com. You want to go to that website and make sure that that chip ID number is linked to your actual account. If you have a microchip that's implanted in the dog, but you don't register the account, it doesn't do anyone that were to find your dog any good. So you want to make sure that you have that information registered and updated. Like if you change your phone number or you move, you want to make sure to go in and double check that registration. And also, another thing that people don't often know about microchips, it's very rare for them to malfunction or to move, but that can happen. So it's a great idea when you go into your vet every year for the yearly checkup and vaccines, just to ask them to double check that the microchip is still there and working. They'll do it for free. You could also get it done at a place like Petco or PetSmart. Like any pet store or vet will scan your pet or a pet you find for free. So
Yeah, unless you happen to have the home scanner like I do.
yes, those work too.
Yeah. Other things that we think about, obviously the window sticker, if somebody has to open the door, police or fire, knowing who's in there and what animals need to be saved. One option that does come up occasionally for pets, for owners who are not sure who's going to take over, Texas A&M does have a shelter that their vet students run. Now they're going to ask for a lot more money than almost anybody else. They do want some extra cash for their vet school, but that is an option we've had for certain pet owners who don't have anybody. They don't know who's going to take care of these pets. Or they just want to make sure that the pets live out the rest of their life somewhere and they don't want it to be a burden anywhere else.
Wow, I didn't know about that. That's a great program.
Yeah. Shelby, anything else you'd want to think about in terms of we're going to have pets who need to transition one way or another? What can we do to smooth that transition for both the pet and that new owner?
Sure. There's one thing that's really important is when you first change a pet's environment in any way, just like people need time to acclimate to a new environment, animals need that too, but it's tenfold. So the first thing I would say is to make sure to give them space. You want to give them their own area, whether it's a corner or a bathroom, or if they're used to using a crate is a great idea. Just give that dog or cat space and let them have time away from the hustle and bustle of the family in the new place. The second thing I would say is to make sure to introduce them slowly to any other resident pets and other family members. They're already kind of out of sorts to begin with, so you want to give them a slow, calm introduction. And I typically wouldn't do any introductions within, just to make sure that they don't have any kind of infectious diseases, and also they've just had a little bit of time to clear their mind. Another thing that's really important is to keep them on a leash in a backyard if it's a new environment. You think that no animal can scale the side of a fence, but me and Emily have both seen that happen many times. So keeping them on leash walks, even in the backyard, is a great idea. And then really just be patient with them. Make sure to give them plenty of time. And one thing that can help with pets is just to give them exercise. That can make it to where they're a lot less overstimulated if they don't have so much energy in their body. So for what I'll do if I'm trying to introduce two new dogs is I'll give them both a really long walk separately before I introduce them. And that really helps with the transition. But every dog is different and it takes some trial and error. But if you're patient and consistent, most animals are really ultimately able to acclimate to a new home or environment.
Excellent. Well, Shelby, I think that's a great place to end things for now. If listeners are looking for help or a way to help out, where can they find out more?
Yeah, so there's a bunch, depending on where you're at in the country. I would just Google, honestly, rescues in my area. And you can always foster an animal, which is a great way to help. If you're in the Houston area, we would love to have you a foster for Rescued Pets Movement. That website is rescuedpetsmovement.org/foster. And yeah, that's about it.
Great. Well, we'll have a link to that in the show notes. Shelby, thanks so much for stopping by.
Great. Thanks. Appreciate you, John.
Thanks so much for listening. You can find more episodes, videos, and links to more helpful content at nounfinishedbusiness.com. If you have any questions, feedback, or ideas for topics, please reach out via social media or email John at john@stromeyerlaw.com. And of course, if you or your clients need help from John with an estate planning, probate, trust, or cross-border tax issue, you can book time directly with John at askjohnaquestion.com.